Welcome to Module 3, Data Governance, and pay close attention, because this is the single most important module in the entire course. Data governance carries about 11% of the exam, roughly 12 questions, and it sits at the very center of the DAMA wheel for a reason. It guides every other data management function. If you master this chapter, you'll pick up more exam points here than anywhere else. So let's give it the focus it deserves. Here's what you'll walk away with. You'll be able to state the definition of data governance and explain the crucial difference between oversight and execution. You'll contrast data governance with both data management and IT governance, two distinctions the exam tests relentlessly. You'll know the 3 goals, the 3 requirements, and the 6 principles. You'll be able to describe the 5 governance bodies and the 3 operating models, identify the 7 types of data stewards, and explain issue escalation, the Business Glossary, the GAIP principles, and the key regulations. That's a lot, but it's all high value. Let's dive in. Let's start with the definition, which you should commit to memory. Data governance is the exercise of authority, control, and shared decision-making, specifically planning, monitoring, and enforcement over the management of data assets. Notice 3 things. First, authority, control, and shared decision-making. Governance isn't dictatorial, it's shared. Second, the trio of planning, monitoring, and enforcement. And third, it operates over the management of data assets, meaning it guides all the other functions on the DAMA wheel. Here's the conceptual heart of it: data governance ensures that data is managed properly, it does not directly do the managing. Hold on to that idea, because the next 2 slides build on it. This is the distinction the exam tests more than any other in this chapter, so let's nail it. Data governance represents an inherent separation of duty between oversight and execution. The classic analogy is auditing and accounting. An auditor or financial controller sets the rules for how financial assets must be managed, but the auditor doesn't actually do the bookkeeping. In the same way, data governance professionals set the rules for managing data assets, and other functions carry those rules out. So on one side you have data governance, oversight, ensuring data is managed, focused on how decisions about data get made. On the other side, data management, execution, actually doing the work across the lifecycle. If an exam answer says governance manages or executes data directly, that's your signal it's wrong. Governance oversees, management executes. The second distinction you must master is data governance versus IT governance, because they sound similar but are genuinely separate. Data governance focuses on the management of data as an asset, its scope is data assets exclusively, and it aligns the business data strategy. IT governance, by contrast, makes decisions about IT investments, the application portfolio, and the project portfolio, hardware, software, technical architecture. Its standard framework is COBIT, Control Objectives for Information and Related Technology, and importantly, only a small portion of COBIT actually addresses managing data. One nuance worth knowing: some topics, like Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, span corporate governance, IT governance, and data governance all at once. But the exam wants you to know that data governance is separate from IT governance and focuses exclusively on data. Data governance has 3 goals, and they form a logical progression. The first goal is to enable the organization to manage its data as an asset. That's the overarching purpose. The second is to define, approve, communicate, and implement the principles, policies, procedures, metrics, tools, and responsibilities for data management. In other words, to create and put in place the rules. And the third goal is to monitor and guide policy compliance, data usage, and management activities, to keep watch and steer. So, enable asset management, define and implement the rules, then monitor and guide. 3 goals, know them as a set. What pushes organizations to start governing data? The most common driver, by far, is regulatory compliance, especially in heavily regulated industries like financial services and healthcare. But organizations also arrive at governance through other doors: a master data management program, a major data quality crisis, or the rise of advanced analytics in data science. The DMBOK groups governance drivers into two themes: reducing risk and improving processes. On the risk side, general risk management, data security, and privacy. On the process side, regulatory compliance, data quality improvement, metadata, and the Business Glossary, development efficiency, and vendor management. There's a very common real-world path the exam likes. A company needs better customer data, so it builds customer MDM, and then discovers that successful MDM requires data governance. Governance often comes in through the side door. For a governance program to succeed, the DMBOK says it must be three things: sustainable, embedded, and measured. Sustainable means its sticky data governance is not a project with a defined end date. It's an ongoing process that requires continued organizational commitment, leadership, and ownership. Embedded means it's not an add-on or a bolt-on. Governance activities have to be woven into how the organization develops software, uses analytics, manages master data, and handles risk. And measured means that governance done well has a positive financial impact, but to prove that, you need a baseline in metrics. Sustainable, embedded, measured. And remember the mantra: data governance is a program, not a project. The exam returns to that idea again and again. Data governance rests on 6 guiding principles. 1. Leadership and strategy. It starts with visionary, committed leadership, and the data strategy is itself driven by the business strategy. 2. Business-driven data governance is a business program, and it governs IT's decisions about data as much as it governs the business's interaction with data. 3. Shared responsibility. Across all the knowledge areas, governance is shared between business data stewards and technical data management professionals. 4. Multi-layered. It happens at both the enterprise and local levels, and often in between. 5. Framework-based. Because governance spans functions, it needs an operating framework that defines accountabilities and interactions. And 6. Principle-based. Guiding principles are the foundation of governance policy. The two ideas the exam emphasizes most: governance is business-driven, not IT-driven, and it's a shared responsibility. The core word in governance is govern, so it helps to think about data governance the way we think about political governance. It has 3 kinds of functions. Legislative-like functions, defining the policies, standards, and the enterprise data architecture, making the rules. Judicial-like functions, issue management and escalation, resolving disputes. And executive functions, protecting and serving, plus the administrative responsibilities, running things day to day. Most organizations adopt a representative form of governance so that all stakeholders have a voice, and they often build multiple layers: local, divisional, and enterprise-wide. So when you think about how a governance organization is structured, map it to those 3 branches: legislative makes the rules, judicial resolves the issues, executive administers. Let's meet the 5 governance bodies stacked on screen by level of authority, because the exam loves to test which body does what. First, the Data Governance Steering Committee. This is the highest authority. It's a cross-functional group of senior executives responsible for oversight, support, and, critically, funding. Second, the Data Governance Council, the DGC, which manages governance initiatives, issues, and escalations. Third, the Data Governance Office, the DGO, which handles the day-to-day coordination, support, and administration, and maintains enterprise-level definitions and standards. Fourth, the data stewardship teams, communities of interest focused on specific subject areas or projects. And fifth, local data governance committees, which only large organizations need. The 2 facts most likely to be tested: the steering committee is the highest authority and controls funding, and the DGO is about day-to-day coordination. It is not the top decision-maker. There are 3 governance operating models, shown side by side on screen, and you must be able to tell them apart instantly. In a centralized model, one single data governance organization oversees all activities across all subject areas, one body for everything. In a replicated model, the same governance operating model and standards are adopted independently by each business unit. Every unit runs its own copy of the same approach. And in a federated model, one data governance organization coordinates with multiple business units to maintain consistent definitions and standards. Central coordination, distributed execution. When would you choose federated? When business units have significant autonomy, face distinct regulatory environments, or manage data domains that don't overlap much. Quick mnemonic: centralized is one for all, replicated is each unit copies the model, and federated is a center coordinating with many. Let's talk about stewardship, because it's the operational backbone of governance. Data stewardship is the most common label for the accountability and responsibility for data, and for the processes that ensure the effective control and use of data assets. What do stewards actually do? They create and manage core metadata like Business Glossary terms. They document rules and standards, both business rules and data quality rules. They manage data quality issues, identifying and helping resolve them. And they execute the operational, day-to-day governance work, project by project. There's a memorable line in the DMBOK: the best data stewards are often found, not made, meaning good stewards frequently emerge from people who already care about the data, though they can certainly be trained too. Remember, stewardship is about accountability and responsibility for the data itself. The DMBOK describes 7 types of data stewards, and the exam may ask you to identify any one of them. The chief data steward chairs governance bodies in place of a CDO, and in a virtual or distributed governance setup may effectively act as the CDO. The executive data steward is a senior manager who sits on the Data Governance Council. The enterprise data steward has oversight of a data domain that spans business functions. The business data steward is a business subject matter expert accountable for a subset of data. The data owner is a business data steward who additionally holds approval authority for decisions about their data. The technical data steward is an IT professional within a knowledge area, a DBA, a data quality analyst, a metadata administrator. And the coordinating data steward leads teams of business and technical stewards, which matters most in large organizations. The single most tested point: a data owner is a business data steward with approval authority. Data policies are directives that codify principles and management intent into the fundamental rules governing how data is created, acquired, kept accurate, secured, made high quality, and used. Here's the distinction the exam tests: policies describe the what to do and what not to do. Standards and procedures describe the how to actually carry governance out. Good data policies share a few traits: they should be few in number, brief, directly stated, and global in nature. They apply across the whole organization. So if you see a question contrasting policies with standards, anchor on this: policy equals what, standards and procedures equal how. It's one of the easiest points in the chapter if you remember that single mapping. How do you put a value on data? The DMBOK is clear that data brings value when it's used. Value equals the economic benefit of using the data, minus the cost of acquiring and storing it, minus the cost of managing its risk. There are several ways to measure that value. Replacement cost: what it would cost to recover the data after a disaster or breach. Market value: what the data is worth as a business asset during a merger or acquisition. Identified opportunities: the income you could earn from BI insights or transactions. Selling data: packaging the data or its insights as a product. And risk cost: the penalties and remediation costs that come from missing or wrong data. The key exam idea: data delivers value only when it's used. Simply storing it creates cost, not value. GAIP, the Generally Accepted Information Principles, is deliberately modeled on generally accepted accounting principles, the idea being that we should treat information with the same rigor accountants treat money. There are 10 principles. Accountability: identify who's ultimately accountable. Asset: manage data like a financial asset. Audit: accuracy should be subject to periodic audit by an independent body. Due diligence: report known and possible risk. Going concern: data is critical to ongoing operations, not a disposable byproduct. Level of valuation: value data at the level that makes the most sense. Liability: recognize the financial liability from misuse. Quality: data quality can affect the organization's financial status. Risk: formally recognize data risk as a liability. And value comes from usage and marketability. Two that get tested. Audit must be by an independent body, and going concern means data is critical, not a byproduct. The DMBOK organizes data governance into 17 activities across 4 groups, and rather than memorizing all 17, I want you to remember the arc of the 4 groups shown on screen. Group 1 is define data governance for the organization, a planning group covering defining DG, doing a readiness assessment, performing discovery and business alignment, and developing organizational touchpoints. Group 2, define the data governance strategy, also planning, covers the operating framework, goals, principles and policies, underwriting projects, change management, issue management, and compliance. Group 3, implement data governance, is operational, sponsoring standards, building the Business Glossary, coordinating with architecture, and sponsoring asset valuation. And Group 4 is simply embed data governance. So the storyline is define, then strategize, then implement, then embed. Remember the arc, and the details fall into place. Before you launch a governance program, you assess whether the organization is actually ready, and the DMBOK names 4 readiness assessments. First, data management maturity. What are the organization's current data management capabilities and capacity? Second, capacity to change. How able is the organization to change its behaviors, and where will resistance show up? Third, collaborative readiness. How well can people collaborate, which matters because stewardship is inherently collaborative. And fourth, business alignment. How well do current data uses align with the business strategy? For assessments, maturity, capacity to change, collaborative readiness, and business alignment. Together they tell you where you're starting from and what you'll need to overcome. The governance strategy produces 4 concrete deliverables. First, the charter, which captures the business drivers, vision, mission, principles, the readiness assessment results, and the success criteria. Second, the operating framework and accountabilities, the structure and the responsibilities for governance activities. Third, the implementation roadmap, the timeframes for rolling out policies, the glossary, architecture work, asset valuation, and standards. And fourth, a plan for operational success, describing the target state of sustainable governance. One quick caution, don't confuse the data governance charter from this chapter with the data management charter from chapter 1. They're related ideas but distinct deliverables, and the exam may try to blur them. Because governance demands real behavioral change, it requires a formal organizational change management process, and one of the foundational tenets is that organizational change requires individual change. The model the DMBOK references is ADKAR, from ProSci, which measures change across the 5 stages shown on screen. A. Awareness of the need to change. D. Desire to participate and support the change. K. Knowledge about how to change. A. Ability to implement the new skills and behaviors. And R. Reinforcement to keep the change in place over time. Awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement. If you can spell ADKAR, you've got it, and the exam does occasionally ask what the letters stand for. A core, ongoing governance activity is issue management, identifying, defining, escalating, and resolving issues. The DMBOK lists 8 types of issues governance has to handle. Authority issues, about decision rights. Change management escalations. Compliance issues. Conflicts over policies, rules, definitions, or ownership. Conformance issues. Contract issues around data sharing, cloud, or buying and selling data. Data security and identity issues, including privacy and breaches. And data quality issues. You don't need to memorize all 8 word for word, but recognize that issue management is a continuous governance function spanning authority, compliance, conflicts, contracts, security, and quality, not a one-time cleanup. This slide contains some of the most testable numbers in the chapter, so let's be precise. Governance issues should be resolved at the lowest possible level, escalating only when necessary. At the base, the data stewardship teams resolve roughly 80 to 85% of all conflicts. Less than 20% of issues escalate up to the Data Governance Council. And less than 5%, only the most strategic, reach the Data Governance Steering Committee at the top. Picture it as the pyramid on screen, most issues handled at the bottom by stewards, a smaller slice rising to the council, and just a sliver reaching the steering committee. Those percentages: 80 to 85% at the stewardship level, under 20 to the council, under 5 to the steering committee, are exactly the kind of detail the exam likes to quiz. The Business Glossary is one of governance's signature deliverables, and it has 4 objectives. First, to enable a common understanding of core business concepts and terminology, getting everyone speaking the same language. Second, to reduce the risk of data misuse that comes from people interpreting terms inconsistently. Third, to improve alignment between the organization's technology assets and the business. And fourth, to maximize search capability and provide access to documented institutional knowledge. Here's a point the exam likes: a business glossary is not merely a list of terms. Each entry is rich, it includes synonyms, related metrics, data lineage, business rules, and the name of the responsible steward. So think of the glossary as a tool for building shared meaning, which in turn reduces the risk of misuse. Since compliance is the most common driver of governance, you should recognize the key regulations the DMBOK names. BCBS 239, tied to Basel, governs risk data aggregation and reporting in banking. It's been in force since 2006 and demands accuracy, lineage, and timeliness of risk data. CPG 235, from the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, ADKAR, is about managing data risk across the lifecycle for banks and insurers. PCI DSS is the payment card industry data security standard. Solvency II is the EU insurance equivalent of Basel, data lineage and quality behind risk models. And you should know SOX for US financial accuracy and HIPAA for US health information privacy and security. The most commonly confused pair is BCBS 239 versus CPG 235. Remember, BCBS 239 is bank risk data aggregation, and CPG 235 is OPRA's data risk standard. The Chief Data Officer extends governance's influence through 4 key organizational touchpoints. First, procurement and contracts, establishing standard contract language for data as a service, cloud, outsourcing, and content licensing. Second, budget and funding, preventing duplicate efforts and optimizing the data assets the organization has already acquired. Third, regulatory compliance, monitoring and tracking new and potential regulatory impacts. And fourth, the SDLC or development framework, embedding control points so that enterprise data policies and standards are enforced as systems get built. And remember from earlier chapters, the CDO typically owns the data strategy and leads not just the initiatives but the cultural change behind them. Let's quickly cover the tools that support governance. A governance website or online presence acts as the central hub for the strategy, policies, stewardship roles, training, and issue procedures. Business glossary tools hold the agreed-upon definitions and link them to actual data. Workflow tools manage processes like rolling out a new policy. Document management tools handle the policies and procedures themselves. And governance scorecards automatically collect metrics to report up to the council and steering committees. On the techniques side, the DMBOK mentions simple but effective things: concise messaging, a contact list, and even a recognizable logo to give the governance program an identity. Tools and techniques together make governance visible and usable. How do you measure a governance program? The DMBOK gives 3 categories of metrics. Value metrics capture contributions to business objectives, reduction of risk, and improved operational efficiency, essentially, what the program is delivering. Effectiveness metrics track whether goals are being achieved, how much stewards are actually using the governance tools, how well communication and training are working, and the speed of change adoption. And sustainability metrics look at whether the policies and processes are performing and whether staff are conforming to the standards. On top of those 3, there's also compliance to regulatory and internal data policies. So, value, effectiveness, and sustainability, 3 categories that the exam expects you to know. Let's pull the context diagram together at a glance. The inputs to governance include the business, IT, and data strategies, organizational policies, the culture and maturity assessments, and regulatory requirements. The deliverables include the governance strategy, the roadmap, data principles and policies, the operating framework, the business glossary, and the scorecard. The participants are the steering committees, the CIO, the CDO and chief data stewards, and the executive, coordinating, and business data stewards, essentially the whole governance hierarchy. The tools are the websites, glossary tools, workflow, document management, and scorecards. And the metrics, as we just covered, are compliance, value, effectiveness, and sustainability. Notice how the participants span both the governance bodies and the full steward hierarchy. Let's consolidate the numbers, because this chapter is dense with them. 3 goals. 3 requirements: sustainable, embedded, measured. 6 principles. 5 governance bodies. 3 operating models: centralized, replicated, federated. 7 types of data stewards. 10 GAIP principles. 17 activities organized into 4 groups. 4 readiness assessment types. 8 issue types. 80 to 85% of issues resolved at the stewardship level. And 3 metric categories: value, effectiveness, sustainability. If a data governance question turns on a number, it's almost certainly on this slide, so review it until every figure is instant recall. This single slide could be worth several exam points. Let me walk you through the traps, starting with 4 big ones. First, an answer claiming data governance executes data management is wrong. Governance is oversight, management is execution. Second, don't equate data governance with IT governance. Governance focuses exclusively on data, while IT governance, through COBIT, focuses on IT investments. Third, the Data Governance Office is not the highest authority, the steering committee is, the DGO handles day-to-day coordination. And fourth, watch the policy versus standards wording. Policy describes the what, while standards and procedures describe the how. Get these 4 straight and you've protected yourself against the most common mistakes. 4 more traps. First, don't confuse centralized with federated. Centralized is one body for everything, while federated is a central body coordinating with many autonomous business units. Second, a data owner isn't just any steward, it's specifically a business data steward with approval authority. Third, never treat governance as a project, it's a sustainable, ongoing program. And fourth, don't assume most issues escalate to the top. Remember, 80 to 85% are resolved right at the stewardship level. And here's a general heuristic for this chapter: when 2 answers seem plausible, favor the one that frames governance as business-driven oversight. That framing is almost always the DBOK's intent. Let's bring it together in 2 summary slides. Data governance is the exercise of authority, control, and shared decision-making over data assets, and above all, it's oversight, not execution. It's separate from IT governance, and it sits at the center of the DAMA wheel because it guides every other function. Remember the core counts: 3 goals, 3 requirements: sustainable, embedded, and measured, and 6 principles. And remember the 5 bodies: the steering committee as the highest authority, the data governance council, the data governance office handling day-to-day work, the stewardship teams, and local data governance committees. Continuing the summary. There are 3 operating models: centralized, replicated, and federated. There are 7 steward types, and the data owner is the one with approval authority. Policy describes the what, standards describe the how. Build a business glossary to create shared meaning across the organization. 80 to 85% of issues resolve at the stewardship level. GAIP gives you 10 principles modeled on accounting. The key regulations are BCBS 239, CPG 235, PCI-DSS, and Solvency II. And the 3 metric categories are value, effectiveness, and sustainability. Master those points and you've mastered the highest weighted chapter on the exam. Now let's put it to the test with 5 practice questions. Because this is the heaviest chapter on the exam, these points really matter, so treat each question seriously. Read the full stem, watch for the qualifier words like best and primary, commit to an answer, and only then reveal the solution. Ready? Let's go. Question 1 asks for the primary responsibility of a data governance council. The answer is D. Approving governance policies, arbitrating cross-functional disputes, and setting enterprise data priorities. The council manages initiatives, issues, and escalations. Day-to-day execution belongs to stewards, the catalog to the metadata function, and architecture to the architecture groups. Question 2 asks which factor favors a federated model over a centralized one. The answer is that business units with significant autonomy, distinct regulatory environments, or limited data interdependency. Federated means central coordination across semi-autonomous units. Organization size, cloud hosting, and personal preference aren't the deciding factors. Question 3 asks for the key distinction between a data governance project and a data governance program. The answer is C. A project has a defined start and end with specific deliverables, while a program is an ongoing organizational capability with continuous, evolving activities. That reflects the requirement that governance be sustainable, not a one-time project. The terms are not interchangeable. How are you doing so far? 2 more on the next slide. Question 4 asks you to distinguish a data trustee, a data steward, and a data custodian. The answer is C. Think of authority flowing downward. The trustee holds delegated authority for a data domain on behalf of senior leadership, the steward performs the day-to-day governance activities, and the custodian is responsible for the technical storage and protection of the data. The other options scramble those accountabilities. And question 5 asks for the most consistently cited critical success factor for governance programs. The answer is D. Securing visible, sustained executive sponsorship, establishing clear accountability through defined roles, and demonstrating early business value. Notice that the wrong answers all describe classic failure patterns: leading with tooling before policy, attempting an exhaustive data inventory before doing anything, or demanding perfect data quality before launch. Governance succeeds when it's sponsored, accountable, and value-driven. That completes Module 3, the most important chapter on the exam. Take a moment to review the cheat sheet before you move on. Next up is Module 4, Data Architecture. I'll see you there. Slide 40.